We now come to our closing discussion, which will be moderated by Robin Wouters, co-founder and editor-in-chief of tech.eu. Robin, over to you.
Thank you very, very much, and welcome back to the Foundations Forum 2021, where we've been discussing all things artificial intelligence, security and privacy all afternoon. As was mentioned, my name is Robin Wouters. I'm the founding editor of tech.eu, and I will be moderating closing debate on these very timely, very important, and also very intertwined topics. As much as I hope to be with you physically at this event in Brussels, due to circumstances that I no longer need to describe, that was not possible this time around, but hopefully next time. In any case, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon, and I hope that you will be learning a lot more in this last session after already quite a number of interesting interventions from MEPs and discussions featuring a wide variety, I would say, of industry stakeholders in the past couple of hours. We have with us today three interesting panelists, to be sure. One is Bojana Bellamy. She is the president of the Center for Information Policy Leadership, or CIPL, at Hunton Andrews Kurth. You may have seen her in the first session this afternoon as well. We have with us also John Suffolk. He's a senior vice president and the head of global cybersecurity and privacy over at Huawei. And last but not least, we have with us another John, John Higgins, who chairs the Global Digital Foundation, which is a leading policy think tank. And we are going to kick off the discussion with a very simple, but also a very straightforward question. What were the main takeaways from the previous discussions? And we're going to kick things off with Bojana. She has more than 20 years of experience and a deep knowledge of global data privacy and cybersecurity law, compliance, and policy. Bojana, welcome. And what are some of your main takeaways? What are some of the things you've learned or prompted you to think about in the previous sessions?
Robin, thank you very much. And indeed, it's been a fantastic day. My brain is literally spinning from everything I've heard today. Incredibly rich discussion. And may I say, the first takeaways, how much sophistication and how much is happening in Europe on all sides, from regulatory to standards, to innovation, to businesses, SMEs. There's a lot happening, and there are a lot of good discussions. And I just wonder, how do we bring all these discussions together, and how do we actually make them heard by the European Commission, the Parliament, the Council? Because really, it seems to me a lot is happening, and I'm not sure we really need that much intervention that actually will completely ignore what the market is doing. And what is encouraging is that the market is trying to create best practices for dealing with AI and dealing with some of these big challenges that we have identified in the day-to-day. Of course, that includes tools, of course, and policies and procedures and toolkits and technology as well. And I think that has to be somehow taken stock of. But there is a big but, right? And the but here is, how do we get people to know about this? How do we get our SMEs to use this know-how that we've heard today? How do we get things which are interoperable? There was lots of talk about standardization and development of tools and technologies, but which one is right for all of us? So I think we sort of need almost to have a catalog and a moment of stock taking and kind of saying, actually, if you do this, we will accept it, and it's good from interoperability point of view. The second big point is that we seem to really need new narrative around data. Somebody has said it here, I think it was on my panel, we have to break silos at regulatory level to look at the data much more holistically and the way we regulate data, because it is, somebody said, what is it, like avocado? I certainly think about it as a new environmental protection, right? We have to make sure we have enough data in the system and nurture and protect it. Otherwise, we don't have a system. Otherwise, we don't have a progress. So it's important to have that unified policy on data from regulatory, lawmaking perspective, but very much at companies level. And I know John Suffolk is here. There's some other business leaders listening. Companies need to think about data in a much more holistic way from both governance, technology, and tools perspective as well. And we do need this proactive data enablement, right? We need data ecosystem. We need to share data. We need to understand risk and benefits of data sharing, not just risks, but benefits very much as well. The third point, very briefly, data availability. Like everybody was talking, from SME panels to this last panel on standardization, that we need more data in the system. Apparently, 50% of time, we have heard, is spent on collecting and preparing data for use. And, who's got time to do that? So we need to enable that to be done with more agility and more flexibility. Everybody needs data, not just SMEs, but large organizations as well. And there is a real call, I heard, for better automated way of sharing data, better frameworks to share data. We can't have procedures and legal requirements and check the box exercises. There has to be agility in how we share data, because if we don't do it that way, somebody else is going to be there ahead of us. Fourth point is regulation and rules are very contextual, right? Technology isn't bad or good. It's how we use and deploy this technology. So how do we take into account context? How do we take into account this risk-based approach? A number of speakers have talked about that at a number of panels. The need to actually regulate in an agile way. So technology moves with big agility, big flexibility, but the rules take long time. So how do we make sure there is this reiterative rule making and reiterative compliance? So these would be some of my kind of first takeaways. There was a lot of support for regulatory sandbox. I was not surprised. I think just like we need to innovate with data, we need to innovate in how we regulate data. So regulators need to step up and use some of these innovative tools like regulatory sandbox and policy prototyping. And my last point is, let's not reinvent the wheel. I think we have heard this even from our MEPs here today, but a number of panelists. We can learn a lot from other areas, like GDPR compliance has taught us a lot on what to do to ensure fairness, accountability, transparency, cybersecurity, existing standards. So it seems to me there really is a lot going on that we can actually build upon as opposed to duplicate and reinvent the wheel. And then I would like to talk about data governance and accountability, but maybe we do that at the questions, because I know both Johns want to, I'm sure, share their views.
Thank you, Bojana, and good to see that you've been paying really close attention to the previous sessions. I also picked up on the
take my notes.
I also picked up on the avocado comment. I really like that one. Okay, we're going to go over to Mr. John Suffolk, saying his full name because there's two Johns on the panel. He's the Chief Cybersecurity and Privacy Officer at Huawei. What are your main takeaways from the previous sessions, John?
Thank you, Robin. First of all, let me just thank all of our contributors today. It's been a very interesting afternoon. But let me give you my takeaways. The first one, I was slightly surprised that we didn't spend a great deal of time talking about the use cases of artificial intelligence that are touching our lives, whether they're personal lives or enterprise lives today. You only need to look at banking, you can look at public sector, you can look at health, you can look at the big technology platforms. AI is pretty much, with us in many, many hundreds of use cases. Yet one of the opening comments was that we won't get a hard law or a decision for 2 years. 2 years. Well, surprise, surprise, technology is not going to wait. The competitors to Europe are not going to wait. And by 2 years' time, the market leaders will be on generation 4, 5, 6, 7 of their algorithms, their use cases, their products and services. So I think, takeaway for me is, and I know that we have this, and I think it's an excellent way that we do it in Europe, this, inclusive, collaborative way to generate rules and regulations and, if you like, happiness. But slightly bursting, Bojana's comment about GDPR. GDPR is a brilliant, regulation, but the reality is it started off as one starting point, but just look at the amount of derogations that member states have had. It hasn't ended up at the same end point. And therefore, we need to be careful in terms of thinking that we're going to introduce one law, and that's going to be common across the 27 member states. It hasn't turned out that way in terms of a GDPR. My other takeaway was really building on the law issue was the hundreds of bodies involved with artificial intelligence. It is a smorgasbord of people with their fingers in the pie. My other colleague, John, here, will remember in our government days the amount of people who jumped on the bandwagon for green IT. Every man and his pet parrot was there doing something on green IT. And it seems to me that we are sort of following that model because we see that as the next pot of gold. My final takeaway on this particular section was I have immense sympathy for SMEs. They are inundated with standards and workshops and frameworks and a raft of regulations coming from our European colleagues. As we've said, you've got to still conform to GDPR, but you've got AI coming down. I don't know where we've got to on e-privacy, but that seems to be stuck in some pretty thick concrete at this moment in time. Never mind the Radio Equipment Directive and NIS2, and the list goes on and on and on and on. And yet we're saying for an SME to make progress, you need the capability, you need the investment, you need the regulatory frameworks, and you need access to data. Well, last count I did on the amount of countries putting regulations in about sharing data it's increasing. We're at 60 or 70 countries now, all putting quite strict barriers on in terms of sharing data. So I think I have a great deal of sympathy for SMEs because often they are the lifeblood of a country's economic prosperity and therefore European prosperity. And I think we should be removing the regulatory burden from these. We should be investing in the SME environment. We should be giving them freedom to try things out in a non-threatening, legal barrier kind of way, because that's where we're going to get the learning. So I'm going to stop at this point, and because I'd love to listen to what John's takeaways are from that. So thank you.
Great, thank you very much. I think those were super insightful comments, and we'll get back to it at the end in the conclusion. Over to John Higgins, who I'm sure has also his main takeaways in his head and will now share it with all of us.
Yes, thank you very much, Robin, and thank you, Boyan and Bilani and John. Yes, and nice to have those references back to the days we worked together in the UK, John. John might remember, I'm not sure anyone else would know, but I'm from Manchester originally in the UK, mostly known for its football teams. And I was thinking about, when I was listening to Brando in his great intro, I was thinking about Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, the recently sacked manager of Manchester United. And I think you could argue Ole Gunnar was sacked because he took his eye off the ball, the ball being win the football games. And in a way, I was musing on the idea that Brando is now the manager of the European team that's got to win the AI World Cup. And what do we mean by that? We mean Europe's. It really doesn't mean beat the other guys, to be honest. What it means is maximize the value of AI for Europe's economy and society. That's the prize he needs to keep his eye on. Now, when I was at Digital Europe and then before that running the UK Tech Industry Association, I was nearly always reciting the mantra of we don't need any more regulation. But I've actually changed my mind when it comes to AI. And the reason for that is that this year, in my role as president of the UK's chartered body for IT, I've seen and we've paid attention to the fact that trust is falling in digital. And there are a couple of data points to support that. One is the Edelman Trust Barometer that I always used to love quoting because tech was always like top of the league. You can trust us, we were the most liked. This year, we're in the middle of the pack, not so good. And the reasons for that, I think one good reason, we did a survey in the UK, this is through the Chartered Institute, after what you can only describe as the fiasco with algorithms in last year's exams for 18-year-olds in the UK. And basically this survey said, we don't want algorithms making decisions that affect our lives. We don't trust them. We don't trust the people that produce them. And so, these things are contributing to a fall in trust. So something does have to be done. I totally agree with John. I mean, my heart fell when Brando said it'll be a year, it might be 2 years. I think, yeah, well, good luck with that. He's got to get his move on, and we've got to get what we brought together, sticking with our footballing analogy, is we brought together the team in a way, or bits of the team that Brando's going to have to work with. So I think, like John in a way, that the innovators and the SMEs, they're our attackers. And it's up to the standards bodies, it's up to the regulators to pass them the ball. I know I'm maybe stretching this metaphor a bit, but the only people who can score goals for us here are the innovators, the SME, and large companies. I'm not a fan of this. It's all SMEs, the big companies. No, big companies, the SAPs and Siemens of this world, they do great stuff and they innovate really well. So we need to get the ball to them in a way that they can play it. And I do think the big issue, it's interesting that quite a few of us picked up on Carolina's remarks. We need to talk about data. And I think if there's going to be a subject for next year's Foundation Forum, it will be about data. How do we, as it were, pass the ball to the innovators so they can take full advantage of the data? We heard some of the issues. So yeah, Brando, if you're going to keep your job like Ole Gunnar, you've got to keep your eyes focused on this prize. It's about Europe getting the benefit from AI, and that's the economy and public sector bodies like health and so on. If I just, there's another thing I could say just to support that point to finish. I've been working for a few years now with another part of the European Commission on what was first of all called the Digital Cities Challenge. It's now the Intelligent Cities Challenge. And it's fantastic because now we're working with nearly 140 European cities using digital technologies like AI to solve the city's economic and social problems. And talk about evidence for the team metaphor, I can show you that every city that's where it's working well has brought political leadership together with the ABC of academia, business, and civil society. You miss one of those out, it really only fires on half the cylinders. You get all those four working together, it's really, really working well. So we have got an issue we've got to deal with. We did bring a lot of the team members together in this event. I think we saw how they talked about slightly different agendas and slightly different viewpoints, and we've still got a bit of work to get them refocused on the eyes on the prize, because if we are all going off in slightly different directions, there's a plethora of organizations all working to slightly different agendas, we really will miss out on the big opportunity and the big prize here. I'll stop there, Robin.
Great. Well, thank you for sharing. Really love the football metaphor, and I would argue that the European lawmakers have never been accused of being the speediest players on the pitch. But yes, on to my next question. I know we don't have a lot of time left, so I really want to get to this one before we close for the day. But can you provide some color from your perspective, from your angle, from your viewpoint, to how your work can contribute to a shared responsibility in AI? Something that's also talked about not often enough, in my opinion. What can and maybe should be done on that level? John Suffolk from Huawei, if I don't mind, I will start with you.
Thank you. Just a few things. As a preamble to my comments here, we need to be careful that we don't try and seek out an AI nirvana. We're looking for a beautiful AI because we think AI has to be beautiful because it can't compete with humans. Every one of us, in this conference today will have done recruitment. We will have made decisions, and some of our decisions are poor decisions, and they're biased decisions, and we've got all kinds of baggage, but we don't want any of that to happen in AI. So I think for me, where we can all help, and certainly where we try to help in terms of Huawei, is that we try and share as much of everything that we do from an R&D perspective. We share our standards, we share our policies, we share our test systems, we share our thinking, and partly because we actually have no choice because the spotlight is always on us. Now, you could see the spotlight being on us as a negative thing. We actually see it as quite a helpful thing. And that's why, for us, we're always working with our 3,000 or 4,000 suppliers around the world to grow their capability. because if we can grow their capability, they provide a better product or better service to us. And that's exactly what we do in Europe. So I think where we can help is the sharing, because we are a big tech firm, we do operate in 190 countries, and different countries take a different approach to solving the same problem that we're solving in Europe. And not all the brains are in Europe, and therefore we can bring those to the party, and that's what we look to do. So where we have knowledge, where we have experience, where we have the mundane things like policies and procedures and standards, we're very happy to share that with our European friends and colleagues, and I think that's a big step forward.
Fantastic. Over to the other John, John Higgins.
Thank you, Robin. Yeah, the way we work in the foundation, Paul and I have worked together for a number of years now, and Paul is the deep thinker, the scholarly academic. He does a pretty good job of moderating too, Paul. Well done. And I've got a systems engineering background, and I'm always looking for, like, what's the solution here? What can we focus on? What can we fix? And there's one thing we're working on at the moment that I think exemplifies the sort of how we can share in order to achieve this prize I was talking about earlier. One of the things that we see in the AI Act as drafted at the moment, that I'm not sure everybody's spotted, but we were looking for it. It says that third parties have to cooperate with providers of AI. And it's interesting, providers of AI are not just companies like Huawei putting products on the market. They could be a railway company bringing an AI system into operation. But there's an obligation on the third parties to cooperate. And I know, because I've talked to a number of these small companies, what does that mean? How, what am I going to do? So I've got to provide assurance up the line, have I? Okay, how am I going to do that? So we're pulling together an industry coalition to help develop an assurance framework. Well, help develop. We want them to develop an assurance framework. It's not a standard. I mean, it's got to line up with standards in due course. But it's a framework that makes that compliance easier and cheaper for SMEs and third parties and large companies in that supply chain. Because if not, we can see, like 2 years in the making, and then another 5 years getting to grips with it. And, by which time, you can all know what will happen by which time. So I think that, that's a practical example. I'm always looking for solutions to practical problems. And I love working with Paul, the big thinker. Between us, we try to cover both the bases. For me, that's an example of sharing to make sure that the EU, Europe, to be precise, keeps its eyes on the prize and even wins it.
Great contribution. Bojana, last but not least, your thoughts on shared responsibility in artificial intelligence.
So one thing that I, as I've said, always feel hugely passionate about is about what can companies, businesses, but also public sector do to deliver that accountability and trust in the system, in the use of technology. And I think the world really has changed. I think we have moved to this age of accountability where the corporate digital responsibility and ethical uses of data are on every board's agenda and every CEO of government bodies. I know, John, you were in the UK government, but I mean, UK government now has come up also with ethical framework for use of AI. We've got Centre of Data Ethics and Innovation as well, etc. So I would really like to see a much more focus on what can we do to build that trust back, and what can we do to take people on the journey with us, right? Because people really need to be taken on the journey. I've become a huge data believer. I have to tell you that, right? In this continent, in Europe, we have changed our laws to have by default organ donation post our death. Yet we still can't share our data. I would love to share my data for research if that's going to help people save lives. Like that, to me, that's a it's a non-issue. You've heard today from Loretta, this is synthetic biology. I don't even understand that. I wish I've done science more in school. But I really want companies to start thinking responsible data use and responsible development of technology, because it is in their interest to do that, not because there is a law, but because if they want a trusted system, they want a sustainable place in the market. And that's what I'd like to see. And we at CIPL have developed the accountability framework for privacy, security, but in fact, the same framework works for AI, because these emerging best practices are starting to fit into what we have seen elsewhere. And I would like us to talk about that. I'm with John completely. And today there was a lot of discussion on open source. The way we open source code and technology, we have to open source solutions as well, right? Bigger players have got a duty to share their best solutions through design jams, or just opening what it looks like so the SMEs can pick that up as well. So not just tools, technologies, but also governance frameworks, accountability frameworks, best ways to ensure human in the loop, fairness, data in, data out, audits. I mean, all these best practices that are being developed now all over the place. So that's what I'm going to be working particularly next year. And I'd love if standardization comes with that and certification, that would be great. But even without that, I think industry and public sector needs to step up.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for your contributions, all three of you. We are going to wrap up the discussion and the afternoon for the Foundation Forum. But before we do, a couple of notes that I took from your contributions just now. A lot is happening, as evidenced by the many contributions in the previous sessions as well. A lot is happening, a lot is being talked about, but now is the time to turn those words into action. The market's already leading the way. They should play a more proactive role. I heard Bojana say. We also have to get SMEs, in particular, to adopt these new technologies and also participate in the policymaking initiatives and the dialogue around it. We need a new narrative around data. I heard her say as well, look more holistically at data regulation and policy and data availability as well. There is a need for more data in the systems, but also a need for more context. When there is regulation in AI or on other fronts, there needs to be a flexible, agile way to look at these things as they evolve over time. From John Suffolk, we heard a surprise on the lack of talk about a certain topic, which is that AI is already being used. Real use cases growing tremendously in frequency and size. So a hard law that's 2 years away is way too much time, and nobody else is going to wait for that to happen. Many more peoples and organizations are jumping on the AI bandwagon, which is a good thing. However, John Suffolk did say that SMEs should be prioritized. They are being inundated with new regulations, new frameworks, new standards, new directives all of the time. So we need to be careful to make sure that they can keep up with all of these changes in an efficient way. And remove barriers, if anything, for them to continue to grow and scale their businesses. We also heard from John Higgins, a very nice football metaphor, but I remember maximizing the value of AI for society and humanity, which I think should always be center of all of these discussions around this. Need of regulation in AI, where trust is one of the biggest factors. I don't think anyone can deny that either. And we need to talk a lot more about data. So those were my main takeaways of your main takeaways of the previous discussions. I hope I got that right. I leave the audience with a very small question, which is actually the same one I asked our panelists in the beginning. What are your main takeaways of this afternoon? If you think about AI, data, privacy, security, what pops into your head? What can you contribute? What else do we need to talk about maybe in the next Foundation Forum? But what should the next talking points be? What should we be discussing instead of this if it's not the right topic for you? This is all the time we had for this closing debate. I hope and trust that you found it very useful. I did. Thank you for your attention. And of course, a massive thank you to the panelists for taking the time to share their thoughts and insights with us. This was Robin Wouters from Tech.eu, and I wish you a very pleasant rest of the day wherever you are.